I think even with sort of junior level PMs and even folks that are outside of the PMO, they think that there's like some shiny magic that we have behind the scenes.
Welcome to the Disgruntled PM Podcast, your weekly therapy session for the chaotic world of project management, transforming daily frustrations into real action. Welcome, everybody. I'm Trevor, the Disgruntled PM, joined today by my guest, Christine DeVol. Christine, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Christine DeVol. I am the owner and CEO of Willow Path Advisory Group. I have been a project professional for over 2 decades. That's really bad, right? Is that
Yeah,
bad?
it's
Oh,
always bad when you say it out loud like that.
yes. 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 Wow. Okay. Let me recover from that. And I have also been teaching project professionals at a collegiate setting for over 20 years. I completely love what I do, even though I just told you all that I've been doing this for over 2 decades. And I stood up Willow Path to really help our project professionals mature their PMOs. And I'm super excited to be with you today, Trevor. I feel like we've been talking for so long.
Well, don't worry. We're going to tap into that PMO expertise of yours quite a bit today.
Yes, I know.
So, because I know that's your passion. So that's what I go after is where my guests have the most knowledge.
Mhm. Yeah.
And why don't you start with explaining to the audience, because we all know what a PMO is in our organizations, but what is a PMO as a whole outside of the PMI definition?
Yeah. Yeah. I talk with my other PMO leaders and my clients, even my students about this. And, for me, a PMO is a home base. This is for other project professionals, whether you're a junior PM starting out, you're an admin within that space, you're a PM, we could go on and on. And there's so many different flavors of PMOs, but this really is a home base of other project professionals where you are coming together to execute on whether it's the IT portfolio, whether it's the strategic portfolio, or operationally, because there's so many different flavors of project management offices where truly you come together underneath that umbrella, underneath the safety net to really deliver value for those initiatives throughout your organization.
Okay. And one of the hot button terms is EPMO. Can you explain what is a EPMO versus a PMO?
Yeah. Well, an EPMO is an enterprise project management office or a strategic PMO. And that is really where my expertise lies. This is a group that comes together. So same concept as I just mentioned for a PMO, but you are coming together to deliver on the strategic initiatives of the organization. So typically you're writing alongside a strategic office or a strategic arm within the organization. So you're seeing firsthand whatever the organization has outlined for their strategic roadmap. And then the EPMO comes alongside their strategic partners to then execute on those strategic initiatives. I like to tell even when I was overseeing an EPMO, you're in a fishbowl when you are in a strategic PMO because you're seeing firsthand these are things that we've usually never have done before. So you don't really have those pathways to say, well, we've done this before. So an EPMO really has a lot of scrutiny when you're seeing these strategic initiatives. A lot of times multi-million-dollar, multi-year initiatives, and you're writing alongside with your executives. You could be reporting to the board on these initiatives. So a lot of high visibility, high risk. And so you're swimming in these fish bowls as you're delivering on those strategic initiatives for the organization.
Yeah, I wanted to get those definitions out there first before we really dig into this topic, because one of the things as PMs a lot of us are guilty of is we throw out these terms in meetings and then we don't define what they mean and assume everybody understands, because a lot of people could think of EPMO as, oh, that's the IT side of the house, not the enterprise side.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good call out, Trevor. When I first got my start designing and developing and launching EPMOs, I was in IT. And so we did, per our CE or per our CIO, we did have a little e. So you could have a
Mhm.
little e and then PMO. But however, when we moved to truly that strategic organizational purview, we then the E graduated and then you were then a big E. But that's a good call out because sometimes we will, and we'll see this. This is a big thing now about managing perceptions. And so, yes, if as project professionals, we're just throwing out our terms, you're probably going to lose your audience, and that could be your executives when you start throwing out all the PM terms that we do.
Yeah, and then, the biggest of the ones is PM itself, because that could be project, program, or portfolio manager.
Yes. Yeah, that's
And
spot on. And so, I've even really started, even just within my realm, just started calling, we're all project professionals. And most of us, we need to start off with having solid project management before you start then graduating into program and portfolio management. But yes, you'll see those terms thrown around. And I'm like, okay, which one are we talking about here? And you do have to clarify.
and there's the other PM, which is product manager,
Yes.
which is
Yeah.
its own beast in and of it. Into
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yes, that is such a real call out. And I've spent 11 years in healthcare, and that is a big term that is really coming out is product management. And so really just having those conversations of which one are we doing and really just differentiating because you're all you're delivering something. And if you go back to the old definition that we used to have with PMI, with a project, it's a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. Now, I know that definition has since evolved.
with a defined start and finish.
Yes, yes, absolutely. It doesn't go on forever. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, ultimately, and I try not to get, especially because I've taught for so long at a collegiate level. I have to be able to disseminate down and not get too hung up on, it's got to be this or it's got to be this, and really just helping folks navigate. Okay, what problem are we trying to accomplish here? What problem are we solving? And really just helping them navigate because too often we get too hung up on the words, and it's really about cultivating value for folks.
Yeah. I remember I worked for a Fortune 500 company in their PMO, and we had an EPMO. This was one of my first roles, so I knew nothing. I was starting out, but I knew enough to see the agile projects, I'll put in air quotes, where every year they just renewed the same charter and everything. And I said, why are we calling these projects? Shouldn't they be initiatives?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they were just ongoing year after year, just click, restart, and that was it. And I was like, those aren't projects.
Yeah. 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 And I've seen it too many times where we're trying to be helpful and then we get sort of stuck in these situations, then to your point, where they may be something that the organization is doing annually, but then we sort of start off being helpful, but then we can't get out of it then. And then we're just constantly kind of in this system of, okay, we're just going to keep doing it every year.
Enter agile.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and it's so fascinating because even with working with my clients, we all are unique in
Hmm.
all the things that we're navigating within our organizations. And it's really just words are so important, especially coming out of healthcare where words are super important. But we're all so unique in these systems that we're sort of swimming in and really trying to cultivate value for our organizations, whether we're nonprofit or for profit. And so it's also critical that we continue to deliver value regardless of whatever P we're docking into.
Yeah. Client work is that's its own conversation all into itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so you spend a lot of your time in healthcare.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I, my first role in project management was working for governance. And that's where I learned about that. And you don't really hear enough about it other than they're the fun police. And in healthcare, especially because there's so much more red tape, so much more stuff you have to worry about. How do you want to talk about how you build out those structures and having to follow state, federal, and local guidelines along with internal processes?
Yeah. Well, healthcare, we have to be grounded in there's a patient at the center of everything we're doing because I've been in healthcare systems. And words are super important. And also, we're very servant leader. So we're ultra collaborative, which is great. I love kind of bringing folks together because that also then helps on the change management side from an organizational perspective. But yes, when you think about governance, and usually governance for not even just for nonprofit mission driven healthcare systems, but governance is usually, it's like a bad word for a lot of organizations.
Mhm.
And so, really navigating and meeting the organization, where are we at maturity wise? And you cannot, I always say, you can't boil the ocean. So, if you're not at a level of, let's say, doing scenario planning for the new initiatives coming in, then don't go there. You have a simple intake. Let's look at your resource capacity. Let's have some trade off conversations. What is the ROI? Them into KPIs sometimes is like mind blowing for them. So it's really kind of meeting the organization where they are at that moment in time and then starting to I always say, lay the seeds for your next level of maturity now. Just sprinkle them in. But yes, I mean, in healthcare, I would say, organizationally, you have to be mindful of obviously the mandates. Years ago it was pricing transparency. So making sure that you're meeting the needs, from a government perspective, but then also then meeting the needs of how we operate within a healthcare system that it might take us a while to get to those approvals because we are very collaborative and sometimes very risk averse too, that you're trying to navigate because here again, we have a patient at the center of everything that we're doing.
Yeah, I remember I worked one of my first roles before I moved into governance was I was a Six Sigma instructor for the VA. And I would go into an office, help out with some of the brainstorming of projects, and someone shows me this whole roadmap of what they want to do, working for the VA, working with insurance. And I looked at him and I said, okay, who's calling the government to change, who's lobbying for these federal changes, who's lobbying for these insurance regulation changes? And I listed out like 10 things that were wrong with the plan. And everyone was like, well, we thought we were supposed to get to 90% efficiency. And I looked at them and I said, math, it's physically impossible. Let's work on getting from 70 to 73% with the realistic possibility in healthcare because there is so much red tape and we forget that.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've helped to operationalize new drugs and it's very fascinating because, you could be planning, hey, the FDA is going to approve this new drug and you're right, you're marching along operationally. And then at the last minute, nope, we're not going to approve it. So, you have to be willing and nimble to accept, obviously in healthcare, so much is disruptive at this point in time. And you have to think about, okay, how is this going to impact the bottom line? How is it going to impact our EBITDA? How is it going to impact our patients? What is our back to lean? What is our throughput? What is our wait times? There's so much that kind of goes into it that it's very different from when I was consulting and I was in for profit. I I worked in the fashion industry. Well, you can fail fast. If that design doesn't work, get rid of it.
So
However, in healthcare, it takes a lot to move the system.
we got to back up for a minute because there is a rule on the show that if you introduce a new acronym, you have to define it.
New acronym?
Well, a new
Oh,
one to the show.
a new one to the show.
And
Okay.
EBITDA, I know what that means, but some of our audience might not because not every PM understands the finance side.
That is so real in regards to finances. And that's really even I would say even more mature PMs. So when and this is and I'll answer your definition question in a second, but especially because I have worked so long with strategic PMs and then you're then introducing them to the strategic side with your strategy office partners. I need you to be able to read a pro forma. And it's those things that we don't learn. And when you're thinking about your EBITDA, so this is your earnings before interest, your depreciation, and your amortization. And so it really is a good financial metric that's looking at your company's profitability and just by adding in your interest and your depreciation and your amortization and your expenses kind of back to the net income of the organization. It's a lot. And you're like, oh my gosh. And so those are things that I've had to work with my PMs on to say, okay, how are we financially looking? And then even taking them back to the pro forma, because a lot of PMs have not seen pro formas coming out to that level of detail. Normally, we're used to looking at our project budgets, but what is the return on the investment? When are we intending on basically getting our money back for these strategic projects? And so it's a total maturity item, especially when you're stepping into, back to our earlier conversation about an ePMO, that I've had to really kind of walk my PMs through and, okay, let's tie back. And what is this project intended to do? And how do we help the organization say, do you want this one or do you want this one, based upon the ROI that those projects are set to have?
Yeah. And then when you talk about healthcare, there could be zero ROI on some of these projects because they're just made to meet regulation
Mm-hmm.
requirements and they're actually costing the company money. And that's not just healthcare, that's industry wide of any project. Sometimes you've just got to bite the bullet to
Mm-hmm.
scale and make that work
Mm-hmm.
with no ROI.
Yeah. 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 Sort of like back to that pricing transparency example I gave you. That wasn't on the roadmap, right? Like, who sets on like, oh, I'm going to give pricing transparency. But even in those situations, even when that mandate first came down, organizations would have needed to have decided, okay, do I want to do pricing transparency and everything that goes with it? Or do I want to look at potentially, because there was a fine
Mhm.
initially, do I want to take the risk of seeing a fine from that perspective? And so, yes, I mean, you see that with all organizations, but especially in healthcare, because there will obviously be mandates that have to come down that we have to abide by.
Yes. I mean, and when you start talking about the focus around this whole conversation is the PMO as a whole, whether it's a enterprise or local level, because there can be just like there are varying levels of PM, there are varying levels of PMO.
Hmm.
And one of the things I've always said, I learned this very early on in my career, but the most valuable part of a PMO is not the governance, it's not the framework, it's not any of that stuff. It's the mentorship that your senior team is supposed to be giving to the junior team, and so on and so forth.
Hmm. Yeah, that's, having spent so long and in and out of client sites before I landed in healthcare, I seen a lot. I seen a lot of what worked, what didn't work. I'm like, I'm gonna take things from that, things from that. And so when I first developed my EPMO in healthcare in a very large healthcare system, it was super important to me that, for me personally, that I created that culture of collaboration. And just because as a profession, we can go and we can get our certifications and we can learn the science side of it. I can skill people up on that. But if we're not collaborative and kind of coming together, because I feel like naturally as PMs, most of us, not all of us, are very type A, right? We're very kind of like, this is my lane, this is my silo, and I'm going to go and execute on my project and don't bother me. I didn't want that, because ultimately, especially when you come into an EPMO, back to that fishbowl example, oh, we're all in that boat together. And so if we don't all swim and row in the same direction, there could be issues later on down the line. And so, for me, it truly was not only about cultivating and skilling up the talent within my team, but then also giving back to the organization. And so, really developing project management, foundational training to give back to the organization, and then continuing to show our value in a different way. And that has always been in all of my EPMOs, even in my program that I have for my PMO leaders. You have to give back. You have to give back not only to your teams, but then also to the organization.
Yeah, I've told this story numerous times, but one of the things I learned in my first role was in that governance role was I was surrounded by senior PMs who had probably an average of 15 years of experience. And here I am, the junior person coming in and I'm auditing their projects. And what I would do is every PM has their own, we'll call it their specialization. You
Hmm.
know, there's agile experts, there's waterfall experts, there's process experts, everything in
Hmm.
between. And I would figure out what each person's specialty was. And every time I'm auditing them or every time I'm having a conversation about their project with them, I would pick two or three questions of my own to ask them to find out how to pick off some of that expertise that they've got from my own knowledge. Because if I've got this wealth of knowledge sitting in front of me and I've got to have a conversation with them, why not take an extra 5 minutes and learn for myself?
Right?
Because I've already got a captive audience.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that. And when I first got my start in project management, I was functional. I didn't have a PMO. I literally did probably everything wrong, made lots of people irritated, didn't play nicely with others. And so I
I still
learned
do most of those things.
that's that's great. Well, maybe we could be friends and we could help each other then. But when I got into consulting, so when I left my role when I first got started as a functional PM, I came into this environment and consultants say they eat their young. And that's literally what I walked into. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I just walk into? But I got a mentor and he was so instrumental. I mean, they just gave him to me. So I didn't randomly go out and find him, but he was given to me as part of the hierarchy within our organization. And he was amazing. And it was just then I learned that I could just go to him and say, Rick, what is going on here? And, he was so instrumental. And that for me kind of started off early in my career, just with finding folks, just observing, not like creepy observing, but like observing and saying, I kind of like that and I like that. And really just absorbing that to really kind of put into my art toolbox on what I wanted to do. And as I continue to evolve and mature and then get into leadership, it was super important to me that my PMs worked collaboratively together. The more senior PMs would partner with more of the junior level PMs, and then also be able to give that back to the organization, having mentorship programs within the organization, because it's really all about people helping people. That's really what it kind of comes down to. And as project managers, we're a people business. And so, you can learn the science side of things, but really working with people and having, it's so cliche. And you see it all the time on LinkedIn about we have to create psychological safety. And I'm like, no, that's not like a buzz AI term. Like, that's true. You have to be able to create that circle of safety with your teams, especially in an EPMO strategic environment. I always had an open door policy with my PMs. Even if my Zoom indicator was red, ping me. If you need me, ping me. Like, let's talk about what's going on. I'll move things around. But it was so important that they knew that they could dock back in when things went a little crazy, because ultimately it would happen on their projects.
Well, there is a caveat to the open door policy that I learned in the military. And that is it's great when leaders say they have the open door policy, but there needs to be a line after that of you need to go through your proper channels first.
Hmm.
Because if your junior PM comes straight to you with every one of their problems and doesn't go to their functional manager, then they're creating a hostile environment, because every time you hear that person's name, you hear a shudder of, great, now I got to solve this person's problem because their boss isn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And their boss could be complete, and there could be two levels of management between you and that person, and they're both completely clueless that this is even going on,
Hmm.
because because in a way you're trying to foster that psychological safety, but you built a culture of negativity around it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good call out. And for me, my leaders were very docked in with their teams. And so, weekly touch bases. I would then schedule skip levels quarterly, and then I moved to annually because my teams got to be too big. But, we all, even as a leadership team, we're all docked in. And so we did a good job of keeping each other in the loop. So if Sally had an issue, I would generally hear about it. Hey, in the event Sally pings you. And that wasn't always the case. I mean, my PMs wouldn't always come to me, but when they did, because obviously they're going
Mhm.
to their direct leader, sometimes they just want to be heard. But when they generally were at a crossroad, okay, what have you tried? Like, I'm not going to solve all of your problems for you. What have you tried? You need to be a thought leader. And so that way, then we can solution it together versus me just giving you the answer. And so really kind of cultivating that thought leadership. So that way they weren't just like, let me just lob a bomb and then you solve it for me. And so that was super important for me, that you're cultivating kind of those pathways, because ultimately I may have been on vacation and I'm not going to
Yeah.
answer your message. And so what have you tried? And so that's, yes, you don't want to just be so open door that they're like, solve all of my problems for me. And so, yeah, making sure they're going to their direct leaders as well.
Yeah. And there's a saying that I've reminded of by a former guest is to be a thought leader, you have to have thoughts to start with. You know,
Yes.
we talk about thought leadership all the time. And going back to what you were talking about psychological safety, I almost want to say psychological safety is the new servant leader, because servant leader was a great idea in the beginning. And then we overused it so much that it lost every sense of meaning and definition because everybody was a servant leader, which means nobody is. And now we've kind of replaced that with psychological safety, where it's holding now, but where are we going to see that term go in 4 or 5 years when everybody's using it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, and I think this is sort of the true test is if you're creating a solid environment and the leader leaves and it still keeps working, a terrible measure, right? You're like, well, let me measure this and see if it works. But, somebody shared that with me last week and I'm like, that's very fascinating. And so, I've seen where the PMO leader leaves and the whole thing crumbles. And so, that to me shows then, well, the leader was kind of holding everything together. But, it's you want to make sure that you have, regardless of whatever term we want to call it, you want to make sure that the team knows that they can dock back into their home base because inevitably we know something's going to happen. Or maybe they're at a crossroad and they're like, hey, my sponsor about managing up, leading up, that was the other term I've heard recently. I'm not getting what I need. These are the things that I have done to kind of work through this with them. However, I'm not getting what I need. And so for me as a leader, if I'm docked in with the team, right, they're gonna phone a friend to me because I have regular touch bases with all those key leaders and saying, hey, so and so, we're sort of at an impasse. What can I help you? I know your PM has done this, X, Y, and Z. What do you need to help kind of move this forward and make a decision? And so I think just really kind of having those open lines of communication, knowing that the PM is not going to get reprimanded because inevitably something is going to go off the rails, that we're in that boat together, that's really going to kind of speak volumes. And so whatever buzzword comes along in the next 5 years, to me, it's you create those conditions and you're ultimately then delivering value. That's kind of half the battle.
Well, I want to pause here for a minute because I want to remind everyone that there is a Patreon to help support the show, and every guest participates in the postmortem interviews. Christine, you volunteered yourself for that when you signed up for this.
Yes.
And the topics that we're going to be talking about are something that I think are very near and dear to her heart, besides a PMO, which are going to be more advanced certifications of the program management professional and portfolio management professional. And then we're also going to be having a spirited discussion about your name and how you present yourself on LinkedIn, because me and her have had some offline discussions about that. And I want to kind of bring those to the forefront a little bit. But for $5 a month, you get to hear this discussion and many more with every other guest. I wanted to share that with you because you didn't even know that was coming yet.
No. How was my poker face? Is it good?
Every PM has a different poker face, I think.
All right. I'm ready. We will do it.
All right. So I want to touch back on something else that we kind of covered earlier, which is putting a bow on that open door policy, because as a leader, when you start getting into the PMO and then the enterprise level, you don't necessarily have the time to deal with the day-to-day project manager's problems necessarily, because ideally there's at least two functional managers between you and the EPMO leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you moderate that open door based off of your level in the organizational chart to kind of, I don't want to say deflect those little problems, but keep those lower problems at the lower level? Because I just wrote about this actually recently of escalating issues needs to be escalated to the proper channels, because if you escalate, we're having an IT problem of getting access to a system to the VP of IT, all of a sudden you've set off alarm bells you don't even know you've done, when it could have just been something as simple as going to an IT manager or an IT director to solve the problem.
Yeah. Honestly, I never really had those issues. And I think, for me, it was creating that environment and knowing they had access to me, but I never really had anybody sort of abusing that. Like, ping, I need help, ping. I never had that. And so even with my leaders, I'm very collaborative, but I do feel like my strategic PMs sort of monitored and regulated. And so they knew that they would go, and they obviously had a lot of access to their direct leaders, but I never had that issue, Trevor. I
Well,
never had people really pinging me. Now, like if their leader was on, let's say, vacation or whatever else, they knew they could come to me. And yes, I would have to then lean into those lower level details. But I didn't mind. Honestly, I didn't mind because, ultimately, when you move into higher levels of leadership, we don't necessarily do the things that we have such passion for, right? I didn't get to geek out on doing project work. And so honestly, I didn't mind, and I didn't feel like I was ever really taken advantage of from that standpoint. But yes, if you're in an environment where they're constantly pinging you, you're gonna have to create some boundaries because and redirect them back to their leaders.
hearing that answer makes me think of something that we've already talked about, which is that mentorship piece of having a senior level PM that a junior level PM can go to say, "Hey, I've got this problem. Have you seen this before?" Because odds are if you're a project manager, program manager, fill in the PM, if
Mhm.
you've been doing this for any amount of time, we all see the same problems. I call it different flavors of the problem. And if you've got enough experience in your industry, whether you're a generalist, construction, or a niche PM, you usually have some derivative of a solution that you can recommend. And then the person with the problem can go, I see where you're going with this now. And then they go run with it on their own.
Yeah. Yeah. I even think too, even just having, whether it's Teams, Slack, Zoom, whatever it is, having a channel where your team can kind of come together and say, hey, to your point, how do I navigate this? Or who do I contact for this? That right there, one, it's creating then that environment where the PMs are all working together. They don't even need to go to their leadership because they're solving it real time and helping each other. And so that I think kind of goes a long way too from that perspective. But I think I'm going to take us back a little bit further because
Mm.
I think even when you're hiring and looking for talent, finding folks that are right, they sort of fit in and they want to help each other. And so I think that's also kind of part of it too is, and I've seen previously where, you bring in the project managers into the hiring process as part of the panel. They're also helping to pick who's going to be sitting next to me. And that may mean that you have to lean in as well as a higher, a higher level PM to help cultivate and train and onboard that more junior level PM. And so there's even some of that kind of onus that naturally happens if you bring them into the process as when you're hiring and onboarding.
Yeah, you just touched on a couple of different things there. And one of those is anybody who's truly in the profession, I'll say, because I call it, there's two different terms. There's project managers and managers of projects. Managers of projects are the admin PMs, the people that think that it's just Gantt charts and checklists and that's it. The project managers are the ones who understand the fundamentals of the role, that it goes way beyond all that. And the PMs that communicate about who to go to for what, like that one person that's been at the company for 20 years who knows everybody, that's the person that I'm always buying lunch for. I'm always making friends with, because when I need something, they're not going to do it for me, but
Right.
they're going to tell me the right person to go to get what I need done.
Yeah.
Because I've been on, my flagship project was my drone project, and there was not a part of a major organization I did not touch. And I was asking them things they've never been asked before in
Yep.
20 years because
Yeah.
it's never been done. And if I wasn't nice, personable, the exact opposite of my usual personality, they would have just shut me down and said, no, thanks. Don't want a part of this. Talk to this, and then get sent in the loop. But because I made friends with enough people, I was pointed to the right people to get the solutions that I needed rather than just a solution that didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think that's what I learned early on. Okay, you don't play nicely with others. Okay, let me fix that. Because I wasn't going to be successful. And I knew that, I kind of fell into project management, but I was like, I kind of like this.
I have theories about that.
Okay, we're going to squirrel. Okay, tell me. And then I'll go back to my story.
So, you've been in this longer than I have, but every PM I've met that's been doing project management for over 10 years tells me I fell into the profession. Backwards, sideways, whichever way, so fill in the direction, but everyone always fell into the role. But we all forget one thing. We did something else before we found project management. We spent 3 to 5, maybe longer years understanding how the corporate world works, how communication works, how you don't send that strongly worded email the moment you type it out and feel it. You wait an hour and then edit it down to be passively worded email.
Yeah.
All those different skills we learned before we found project management. So when we found project management, it was learn the mechanics of the role, but we had a lot of those soft skills that are required. We just had to brush them off, polish them up while we were learning the skills.
Yeah.
And that brings me to what I wanted. If you don't mind, I want to change to you now because, you're teaching the next generation of PMs. And for the first time in probably for the last like 3 to 4 years, probably has been when we've seen project management being a viable profession right out of college.
Hmm.
And we're, us old guard, so to speak, we're complaining they don't understand, they don't know. But it's not that they don't know, it's that they didn't have the time to learn it. How are
Hmm.
we supposed to build this next generation without that foundation?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I like that we scrolled into this. I like this topic. Yes, those of us that have many years in this profession, yes, because back when I got started, first off, I didn't even know what project management was.
None of us did.
And no. And my undergrad is in psychology. I had planned on getting my PhD in clinical psych. So I wanted to listen to people's problems all day long. And
So
it's
you
funny.
became a project manager.
So I became so fun. Yes, because I realized about 3/4 of the way through my undergrad, I'm like, I don't think I want to listen to people's problems all day long. So I still graduated with my undergrad in psychology, started my MBA, finished my MBA, and I was working foreclosures. I was a foreclosure analyst at a bank, moved into like a special servicing area of mortgages. And my VP's like, hey, you're really smart. I want you to go and become my PM. I had to look it up. I didn't even know what that meant. And somebody's like, go get the PMBOK. So I just started reading the PMBOK. And that's how I got my start in project management. And I did it all wrong. And so what's fascinating to your point is not long, it was about a year after I fell into it that I moved out of that role. I moved into consulting, took my PMP, I passed it, and I then started teaching. So I've been doing project management almost as long as I've been teaching it. And so when I'm with my students, even, 20 years ago or even now, I'm still teaching the science. And to your point, they have, to me, a beautiful jumping off point. You're learning the science. You could come right out of some of these collegiate programs and sit for your CAPM. And
Mm.
they're learning the science side. But here's the but. And I try to tell my students, and I always feel like I never have enough time. You're learning the science, but you're not learning the art side. And it's whatever you have in your art toolbox. And you're going to start off. And I think I just commented on a fellow content creator's post today. You're going to start off and you're going to screw it all up. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to be like, "Well, nobody prepared me for this." And you're going to get some lumps along the way, and you're going to get some battle wounds, and you're going to come back and do it again. And you're going to create those pathways to add more into your toolbox, because what we're teaching is the science side. And that's where I try to layer in with my students of the art side and how you navigate when people are really upset at you, or you've made a mistake, or how do you do that? And that takes time. That takes time, but you are getting a jumping off point because there are programs that you can take right now. I mean, it's beautiful. Obviously, they didn't have that back in the Stone Age when I got started, but now
Well,
they do.
and to your point though, thinking about a lot of this stuff, it's preparing them better clinically, so to speak, for understanding what they need to know, but there's still no way to prepare them for the actual role. And it goes back to something that I wrote about probably a couple weeks ago or a month ago, of if I could go back to my younger self and give my younger self advice, what would I say? And I said nothing, because he wouldn't have listened anyways. And we can impart all the wisdom and all these experiences, but until you're prepared to listen and see it, because conceptually it sounds great. Oh yeah,
Mhm.
I won't do that. but then you get put in a similar situation and you don't recognize that tool that Christine taught me when I was in my PM 101
Mhm.
course would really help me get out of this jam.
Yeah.
But because it's not the exact same scenario that you described, it doesn't fit. But if you've been in that position, taking those lumps, you learn very quickly what that situation looks like and derivatives of that look like in parallel.
Yeah. Yeah. I I've been reminded of that. I've had to remind my leadership teams in the past of that because for us, you're like, why didn't you just do X? Because they're still learning it. It's like our kids.
Oh, don't get me started on that. We've talked about that at
I
length
know.
in the DMs.
To your point, you're not ready to hear it.
Yep.
You're not ready to hear it. And yes, even with my leaders, I'm like, you have to earn some badges.
And
And and when you walk through that, you're like, oh my gosh, that was terrible. But you had to go through it. You had to go through it. And I've seen this, I think is a big opportunity is you'll see some of these junior level PMs, they have maybe a year or two underneath their belt and they're like, okay, I'm ready to become a senior PM or a program manager. And I'm like, okay, not yet. And those can be difficult conversations because not that there's like, ding, now you're ready because you've hit this point. It just takes time in those pathways and really just navigating all the stuff that we navigate. And, this profession, we can take some lumps and we can be the ones that they're poking at when things don't go well. And sometimes it can be thankless.
there's
You open a new building and everybody's like thanking this person and the architect in this building and the PM is like, I just did all that.
Well, there's two things that you mentioned there that I want to highlight, and that is those lumps, those battle scars, all of those things, they happen at every level over and over and over again. You don't become immune because you go from junior PM to senior PM. When you become a senior PM, you get new lumps, new scars, new wounds. When you become a PMO manager, same thing. And to your point about that junior PM trying to be the senior PM, one of the things that I think that we're doing a disservice in the profession too is not everybody is meant to be a program manager.
Hmm.
Not everybody is meant to be a portfolio manager. Not everybody is meant to be a PMO manager.
Yeah.
And they are different skill sets. You can progress into them, but sometimes you get that project manager that's just an amazing project manager. And that's all they want to do. They don't want to learn about the finances. They don't want to learn strategy. They don't want to learn the global picture of everything. They just want
Hmm.
to focus on their project and move on.
Yeah.
And we need to be accepting that and also letting people know that's okay.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my gosh. That is so spot on because as individual contributors, that's not a bad thing. We're all
Exactly.
leaders in our own way and getting a seat at the table regardless of whatever level that you're in is so fundamentally important. But yes, I have worked with so many, senior level project managers that are like, I'm good. I don't
Well,
I don't want to deal with the leadership side of things.
and that expert level individual contributor, whether they're a project manager, program manager, or portfolio manager, they're your best spokesperson for your junior team to develop them because when you see what I'll call it perfection, but I'll put perfection in air quotes because nobody is ever perfect. But when you see what that looks like as a junior person, that gives you something to aspire to versus just
Yeah.
seeing a bunch of people that you're looking at going, I can do it better than they can.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it's so fascinating 'cause I think even with sort of junior level PMs and even folks that are outside of the PMO, they think that there's like some shiny magic that we have behind the scenes. And it reminds me that because, I've been doing this for so long that you take so much of it for granted because I have all
Mhm.
these pathways. And yes, believe me, I have taken so many lumps and continue to take them. Even now moving into a CEO and founder role, that's just how we grow and we have to be okay with being uncomfortable. I think it hit me a couple years ago because I had so many people that are like, can I mentor? Can I like mentor you? Mentor like with you? Can you be like
Mhm.
my mentor? What I started to find out is they think that there's something magical that happens behind the scenes. And I'm like, nope, nope. What I teach and talk
Is what
about
I do.
is what I do. There's no magic behind it. But because we're just naturally ingrained, right? We're kind of programmed this way that they see it as like this allure and it's like this magical place that they're trying to get to. Even I think even with junior level PMs, and it's like, no, that comes with time,
Yep.
time in the seat and experiences and just life. and navigating all the complexities, and when a project fails, or when a sponsor yells at us, or when you deliver a project and it was a success, and y- all the good, the bad, and the indifferent, it all kind of cultivates and makes you kind of where you are, you know, later.
Or when you pick when you pick a supplier who ends up going bankrupt before you can actually implement the project.
That sounds awful.
I wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know. You wouldn't know.
So, Christine, we could talk for hours, but I think that we've found a good place to wrap. So, I'm going to ask you my personalized question that every guest gets. So, in your experience, because we've been over that you have had quite a bit of it, you're in a leadership role. You've been in a leadership role for a while. What is the most creative excuse a PM has given you for why their project is 6 months behind, but technically it's still on track?
Nothing comes to mind, but I'm sorry. If your project is 6 months behind and I don't know about it as your leader, then we have problems. We're going to have a conversation. But I don't know. I always had strong mechanisms in place from health indicators that things were not going to go that wonky with me not knowing about it and us really kind of helping the PM. And if we're that far off, I don't know. We may have to have some HR conversations
Well,
because
then let's change it to what's the best excuse you've been given, period, for why something didn't happen. You've got to have some good ones.
I don't know. Normally I don't have, nothing really kind of comes to mind. Now, I mean, if you're going to ask me some like interview, sometimes when I've interviewed and had some really interesting responses, I could talk about that. But, I feel like when it comes to projects and things are not going as planned, like it's somebody's pointing to somebody else. And that's not very creative or fun. But that's normally what it kind of comes down to. So nothing, I
Yeah.
don't have anything
I've,
creative
I've
on that
always
one.
found I've always found that if I'm going to deliver bad news, I find a way to make them laugh at least while I'm delivering
Hmm.
it. So at least it softens the edge a little bit.
Hmm.
So when they're done laughing, it makes it harder for them to yell at me.
That's good. That's good. When I've had to break the ice a lot when I'm teaching, normally humor works really well. And when my kids were little, I would usually tell a story about, something they would say to me, like, why are you wearing that? Or why does your hair look like that? And you're like, God, I was just offended by my kids. And, then people
Oh,
can relate. And so,
I I just wrote this about a month ago. I was sitting with my daughter, and one of my favorite phrases to tell my kids is, Dad's not dumb. I tell them that all the time when they ask me how I know something. And I sat there with my daughter at dinner, and we're just sitting there, and she's asked me something. I'm like, Dad's not dumb. And she looks at me, she goes, Yeah, but you didn't say you were smart. And I didn't know what to say to that.
right. Yeah. Yep. Yep. You're like, that's a fair point. Then how do you
Yeah.
respond? And you're like, I have nothing.
Well, so then what do I do? As any great content creator does, is I posted it on LinkedIn because, that's what we do.
Yes. I love it. Yes. I have a preteen. And so I have to be careful of what I post because, everything results in like eye rolls or like, okay, mom. And so I have to be careful about what I post about her at this point.
Yeah. And that's a whole nother conversation in and of itself. But
Yes.
I think that that's a great place for us to wrap. So I want to hand the floor over to you to let the audience know where they can find you, what you're up to, all that great stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Super fun. I've enjoyed our time together. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Christine DeVol, and you can also so my company is Willow Path Advisory Group, working with project professionals and PMO leaders as we develop out your PMOs, working on your foundation and really just maturing you into true project portfolio management. You can find me at christinedevol.com. And yeah, just reach out. I am probably super helpful when it comes to folks just pinging me, working with veteran groups and other project professionals. So reach out if you need anything. I really love giving back to our profession and super excited to be here with you, Trevor.
Yeah, links will be in the show notes for you so that you can look her up and get her name spelled correctly.
Yes, that it is with an O, not an I at the
Oh,
end.
I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, those automated systems, when they call me, I'm like, really? Devil? Is there an I in my name somewhere? Yep. I'm like, it's so that I have a conversation with the automated system. I'm like, it's Deval. DeVol with an O.
My last name is always an E or a U, just depending on who finds it and what they're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it never fails, but the best
No,
is when I get Trevor and I'm just like, okay, you didn't even look at my name.
no, no. That's great. That's great.
Well, I think that's a great place for us to wrap. So I want to make sure I take a moment, thank all the Patreon subscribers, thank all the listeners. Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow. It's the best value in town because it's free and it really does help with the algorithm and the promotion of the show. And if you enjoyed this episode, stay tuned and there's always going to be a new and exciting guest. If you didn't enjoy this episode, then go back in the back catalog because I'm sure there's going to be somebody else that you'll find more interesting.
That's great.
So I'll end like I always do. Mail your deliverables be on time, your budget's in the black, and your scope not creeping. For Christine DeVol, I'm still Trevor, and I'm still the disgruntled PM. Thanks for listening.